The Grim Drive podcast explores mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. Pro athletes come forward more and more with stories about their mental health journey, what they have endured, and how they managed to push through, reflecting a mental health stigma that continues to be reduced. Pro athletes also leverage mindset to achieve peak performance, as well as representing and often driving elements of popular culture through the use of social media, technology, and personal branding. This places athletes front and center as role models for people of all ages, giving them a platform to reach many and deliver important information, including information about mental health. Welcome to the Grim Drive podcast. My name is Jotham Busfield. I'm joined here by my co-host John Cuna. As always, we're going to do things a little bit differently today. Today, we don't have a specific athlete and topic. We're actually going to sort of recap our first 10 episodes. I think 10 episodes was a lot of work. I think we both had an idea of how much work it would take coming in, but it definitely surpassed that. So, key takeaway, not easy to have a podcast, right?
Right.
So we're going to get into that today. We're going to talk about our first 10 episodes and sort of our takeaways. We usually discuss our takeaways about an athlete or about a mental health issue or that kind of thing. Today, we're going to discuss our takeaways from doing 10 episodes of a podcast on these types of issues and athletes. So before we do that, I would like to just take a little bit of time to thank a few people. Obviously, I think we've talked about this in other episodes, but success, I wouldn't say this podcast is a success, but anytime you take a chance to do something new and you're able to do it, at least fairly well, I think, that to me is a success. It means you set a goal, and it means you push yourself to see it through to the end or see it through to a certain stage of that goal. And I think we've done that, and I think I'm proud of it. I know you are, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen alone. Right? There's a lot of people that go into these types of things. We've tried to say that in other episodes, that one of the biggest myths we see in working, we work mostly with young guys, but is that they think success has to be done solo. Like they cannot accept help. They have to find some path to proving that they can do it on their own, because that's what would allow them to accept themselves. It's just not how it goes, right?
Right.
So we want to thank the people that have been involved. We want to first thank Dimitri and the Go Network. Dimitri is a podcast producer master.
Yeah, wizard.
Oh, absolutely. And he's not afraid to tell us when we need to stop spinning in our chair.
Right.
And doing things like that, which we're going to get into. There's a learning curve, and he's helped with that immensely, and we really can't thank him enough. So we appreciate that, Dimitri. Mm-hmm. We also want to thank Cody Brackett, is our... he's like our video editing wizard, right? Mm-hmm. He's amazing.
Yeah,
I want to thank him very much for all the work, the graphic work, and the video editing that he's done for us. Always on a quick turnaround too. He's just great at that stuff, and he's a great person as well. We also want to thank Christina and Julia at CJPR. That's the social media management and PR company we've been working with. Mm-hmm. I want to thank them. They've been a great help. I want to thank Tom Nguyen at Revive Digital Design. Tom did our Grim Drive website. And he's helped us with, just the podcast hosting sort of process, and it's like speaking another language. So we want to thank Tom because he's got that down.
Yep.
And then we also want to thank our logo designer. He did our Grim Drive logo. He's done logos for our programs and for our main company, Riser and Tread. I don't even know. I think his name is Sergey. I don't even know. Like, he's just got. I tried to find out, but he said just to mention his designer name at 99 Designs. So his designer name is design_13. Mm-hmm. And if you go onto 99designs.com, you can, get logos done for pretty good prices. And design_13 is the guy who's done our stuff. I think he's out of Russia. I have no idea. Yeah. I just know that he's super nice, and he's very creative, and he's very responsive. He's just a great guy to work with. We've done a lot of work with him. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to take time to thank everyone. To your earlier point, like we talk a lot about no one can do it alone, and a lot of guys that come through our door think that they can. Mm-hmm. And so this is just sort of practicing what we're preaching of like the importance of taking a moment to appreciate and show gratitude for the people who have helped us do this. We certainly didn't know how much it was going to be coming into it, but the people that we've surrounded ourselves with have really been an enormous support. Again, to Dimitri, who's been able to like really help us with this and give us cues and things that maybe we could do a little differently or better, which we're going to get into some of our failures through this process. But just echoing, thank you for everybody that's really helped us to put us into this position to be able to do this work.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a blast and a lot of fun, but we wouldn't have been able to do it with any of those people.
Absolutely. So what are your takeaways about the moments of growth, shall we call it?
The spinning in the chair piece was one for sure.
That was me, by the way.
That was Joth. Although I find myself doing it even now. I'm like resisting myself spinning in a chair.
That started for me when we first started during the pandemic. We started to do YouTube videos because we wanted to like just get some helpful information out there to people who were struggling, and some parents had asked us to do that kind of thing. And I think I remember, I don't know if it was your wife or my wife was watching the first video, and she was like, "Why are you spinning the entire time?" Like, I didn't even realize. I guess I just do this kind of thing where I'm spinning, and it helps me kind of stay centered. So that's something I clearly brought into the podcast studio and didn't even realize until he pointed it out. I think I've gotten it down so that I'm not spinning anymore.
Yeah.
But I'd be lying if I wouldn't say like I'm more comfortable when I'm spinning. I think something about that rhythm helps me kind of stay in a flow state or something. But
for sure. I'm the same way. Like I need to when I'm talking on the phone with somebody, and I get made fun of this at home, but I'm like walking around the house. Like I can't. It's hard for me to like sit and do that. So it's the same thing. And I like again, I can feel like myself resisting the urge to spin, but like that helps me to kind of do some of that stuff. And oftentimes you don't recognize those things because you've just been doing them all the time. So to have people come in and tell us like, hey, something you should think about, you know,
exactly.
You're spinning a lot in your chair and it makes it hard. Or, you know, for me, I think one of the things that I've noticed and I've gotten feedback from some of the people who have listened and watched has been that like I nod my head a lot. So, and it's usually like, you know, I'm in agreement with you. And it's something that I do like when I'm with people or I'm talking, I'm sort of like, yeah, I'm with you. Like I hear you, but it can be a little bit distracting sometimes. So I've had to try to work on that a little bit. Also,
well, in your defense, I talk too much, so I mean, like, you know, you got to do something while I'm rambling on. So,
and then just I think, like in the beginning, I put a lot of pressure on myself of like, oh, I got to make sure that like what I'm saying is, you know, perfect and all this different stuff, and I had that on myself, and then you know, because of that, I think it came across, at least in the earlier episodes, as like not as organic and a little bit too. And I think the more that we've done this, the more that we've gotten into more just like a conversational style, it's been much better. That was certainly a process. We've gone through 10 episodes now of doing it. So it's taken us that amount of time to get there. But that's been one of the things that I've been trying to work on, of just being a little bit more conversational in the approach rather than just like more like robotic, like here's the things and this is this and this is that. It doesn't come across, and as a listener, like when I listen back, which is uncomfortable as it is, that's something that I really noticed. And I got some feedback from you guys that were listening that was like, hey, just be a little bit more like relaxed when you're having the conversation. So that's
I definitely got that feedback in the first 2 episodes that you know, felt a little rushed or that kind of thing. And it's hard. I mean, I think we've definitely come a long way from episodes 1 and 2 to like now. I think it's like night and day.
Yeah.
Which is expected. I think there's a learning curve when you're doing things new, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to balance like being ourselves and being conversational in a way that's approachable, but also getting that people listening important information and make sure we get that in there. That's a hard line to find, and I think that we've gotten a little bit better at that, but it's a challenge. I think it was especially hard in the beginning. Let's see what else.
What are your takeaways from that?
Well, there's the spinning thing. There's moving your mouth. Like I move, like I'm moving around, like looking at different things. You can probably hear as I'm doing it. And, you know, I'm trying to look at my notes, or I might look at the screen, or I might look at you, or I might look at Dimitri for a second. And every time you move your mouth, you're at a different, you know, proximity to the microphone.
Right.
So that takes getting used to, being able to kind of like look around without moving your face and not spinning in your chair at the same time. It's hard. You know, it's hard to get used to that. We've worn the same clothes a couple times. You know, a few people have called us out for that. Yeah. In our defense, we do. Most people know this, but we own a company together called Riser and Tread, where we do therapy and coaching. You know, mostly with young guys, young male clients. Not all, but most. And so we have stuff where we represent the company. We have our logo, and they're comfortable clothes. Both of us are, you know, secretly on a mission to become Steve Jobs, where we can just wear the same outfit every day for ease of use. So
make things easier.
Yeah, but we maybe need to coordinate which merch we're wearing coming into the episode, so that we don't have the same green hoodie on every time we do that. But we lucked out today, so that's good. Let's see. I think other than that, I mean, I think those are the main ones. You know, we didn't have too many, you know, issues with doing multiple takes. I think for the most part, episode 0, we had to do a couple times. But besides that, there weren't many outtakes. I think there was one where I just, wrote a note down that made no sense. It made sense the night before. It didn't make sense when I was looking at it during the episode, and that threw me off. And Dimitri had to kind of restart us. But other than that, you haven't had a single one. No pressure, John.
Well, yeah, right. No, today's the day. First time for everything.
So I think that, those are the main takeaways in terms of, who we want to thank and what we've learned so far. I do want to cover one thing, in this episode as well, and it's just to kind of clarify what our approach is or how we choose athletes, but mainly topics. I think, we're trying to get a balance of topics that cover a wide range, right? So we don't want to fixate on labels. We don't want to fixate on just mental illness and, depression or anxiety or bipolar and just like only do diagnoses or labels.
Right.
But we don't want to ignore those either. We don't want to leave those out because those are important for people to understand what those are and how to, see the signs of that kind of thing. I think it's important to educate people on that. But we also want to talk about, issues, certain emotions, right? We did an episode on anger. We also want to talk about concepts that we think relate to people's wellness, whether it's masculinity or financial literacy or things like that. So, John, for you, I want to maybe just toss this to you to describe, like, for the listeners, what's the difference, between like mental fitness, mental health, and mental illness?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to sort of define these terms because with an influx of conversation around the topics, I think there's also been an influx in confusion. And I think oftentimes with these types of things, people sort of like pull hot topic words and put them in places that maybe don't necessarily belong. And I think mental health and mental illness especially are two prime examples. And so I think taking some time to define those terms would be really important. I think when you think of the concept of mental fitness, that's much more of like a proactive, like coaching, skills-based training of here are some things that will be really helpful for you to build just a greater mind, right? Greater mental fitness piece. So you can talk about like goal setting, fear setting, visualization, imagery, those types of things to kind of help, strengthen the mind and the brain, but much more of a proactive approach to doing some of those things. More like performance mindset.
Yeah, I feel like proactive is a great way to do it. A great way to put it because you're really you're training your brain consistently instead of like waiting for something to happen and then reacting. So,
right, exactly. Which I think in our field, oftentimes people are coming to us in that retroactive stage, right? Like something has gone wrong or they're in a bad spot and they need
damage
help.
Control, basically.
Right, exactly. And mental fitness is much more about like things are going well, but that doesn't mean that things couldn't be going better. So that's where we're hoping to kind of continue to push the dialogue of this is something that's not, you don't have to wait to get the skills. You can develop them now and hopefully be in a better position to feel better if things don't go well. You've already got the skills to kind of help you and you're more prepared.
I think it relates to athletics too, because you can touch on this a little bit, but like in terms of people training, if you're not training consistently, if you're not staying in shape, this doesn't just apply to athletes. I think it's people in general. You're more at risk for injury because you're not keeping your body in a position to withstand some of the adversity it might go through physically. You're more at risk for pulling something or breaking something or that kind of thing. I think mental health is very similar to that, right? If you can kind of keep yourself sharp and keep yourself prepared and resilient and understand how to stay ahead of the curve, right? Because we know a lot of this stuff is cumulative.
Yep.
It seems like it comes out of nowhere, but it really does start much earlier and it's gradual. And especially for guys, not just guys, but guys are just, notorious for holding things in. That's the stuff. Like if you're being proactive with mental fitness, you're not holding it in. You're really intervening earlier with certain skills and strategies to release that a little bit so that things aren't accumulating, right?
Right. And then you get to that big moment of like, I can't hold this anymore. And then you got to come and talk to somebody because you're sort of in spiral.
Yeah.
So, I think that's something that's big. And I think in terms of athletics, a very easy thing to compare it to is if you want to get stronger, you go to the gym and train and lift weights, and your brain is a muscle. You can do weight training for your brain by doing some of these types of things. And when you sort of compare the two together, it's like, well, if I want to strengthen my body and get faster or stronger, I go to the gym and I lift weights and I do that. Why am I not doing it for arguably the most important muscle in my body, which is my brain? And so hopefully through this conversation and other conversations that are going around the country, that people will start to understand the need for this sooner rather than waiting for something to go wrong. Mental health is I think the biggest distinction that we see, the discrepancy we see between mental health and mental illness is really like the diagnostic piece, right? Mental illness is like the depression, anxiety, the DSM-5.
Yeah, they meet criteria
right.
for something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you've got to hit certain standards to get a certain diagnostic. That's mental illness.
Yep.
Mental health is not necessarily mental illness. Mental health is more of like the umbrella genre of everything that goes into that. And that's more of like the broader topic. And mental health doesn't necessarily mean you have a diagnosis. You can still work on your mental health without having a depression diagnosis or an anxiety diagnosis. You can still be working on those types of things. And I think the conversations we hear now, a lot of them are talking about just mental health when they're really meaning to talk about mental illness. And I think that it can split the conversation. So people who are mentally ill maybe don't feel like they're a part of mental health conversations or vice versa. And really, I think that can be problematic in a sense, which is why we wanted to take some time to really like define these terms. And mental health is more about like just a piece of your well-being, right? Like nutrition or, exercise and mental health, right? It's those sort of like the three trifectas of sort of well-being. And mental health fits that piece of like making sure that you're taking care of yourself through, self-care, which again is another one of those topics and words that's sort of been stolen and morphed into something that's not quite accurate. And it's more of like, it's almost like the butt end of a joke now, but so it's taken away from the importance of like, no, it's really important to take care of yourself, first and foremost. And so that's kind of where I see mental health of like, how do I take care of myself? Right. What do I need to do to be able to be in a good space for the rest of the day or for however long? And mental illness is more of that like very direct treatment, coming in and working with a clinician or a psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever. We're going to get into that in a minute, but that's more about like the very specific treatment. So that's kind of how I see the breakdown of the difference between those three.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, mental health to me is like, this sort of state of your mental health at present. I guess that's the best way I would describe that word. Mental illness is sort of when mental health issues get pushed far enough that they reach criteria for that, right? Again, so it's very kind of diagnostically based. I do think it's sort of a continuum, right? I don't think it's like mental health or mental illness. I think it's like this kind of gradient where like if your mental health, gets to a certain range, you're approaching that line in terms of mental illness. And I think, it's a fine line between the two. It's kind of invisible till you don't know when you're going to cross it. I think substance use can be like that. A lot of mental illness can be like that, where, it can seem like one day you were fine and then the next day you have a mental illness. So I think the line is hard to see. I think it's a fine line. I think it's a continuum, but mental illness is always mental health, but mental health is not always mental illness. I think that's one way to put it. And when mental health issues get pushed far enough to reach the level of mental illness, it's hard to always know why that happens. I mean, sometimes it's because of, gradual life events. Sometimes it's because of like the systems we're a part of, or our family, or, different cultural effects or things like that. Sometimes it's loss and grief. Sometimes it's trauma. Sometimes it's biological or hereditary, right? There's a lot of different factors that go into it. We don't always know why, right? So that's important to know too, that, it's not always like someone was, mentally healthy and then they gradually kind of went to mental illness. Sometimes they were just predisposed to have issues that put them in a position of being mentally ill. So it's kind of different across the board. But I think we try to choose topics that cover all three of those, right? Mental fitness, mental health, and mental illness, because I don't think I know that things up to this point may have been geared much more towards labels and mental illness, but we don't want to just completely disregard that either. I think it's important to educate people on some aspects of those while also integrating mental fitness and mental health concepts to kind of normalize the continuum or the scale that people kind of are on.
Yeah, and I think that hopefully this is where it's going to go. And I feel like right now when I talk to like performance coaches around the country or other people, it feels like there's like just two pockets, right? There's no combination of mental illness and mental health and mental fitness. You're either or, right? And what we're hoping to be able to do here is like, why would you not want to combine everything all together to sort of, you can't work on mental fitness if you're mentally ill. You can't, or vice versa. So it needs to be a collective approach. And there's not a lot of stuff out there that at least that I've been able to find that is like being able to combine sort of the clinical licensure stuff that we have with the more the mindset, mental fitness piece. And that's our goal is we're really trying to, like you said, we're trying to bring all three categories together to talk about them because it's not happening anywhere.
Yeah, I agree. So on our first 10 episodes, we're going to recap those a little bit briefly and just talk about each one a little bit, I guess. I mean, episodes 1 and 2, we mainly chose those because of their role in mental health becoming more vocalized. I do think now, with regard to DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Love, the way we titled the episodes were about depression and anxiety. The way they talk about things are their depression or their anxiety. So it very much is geared towards, I guess you'd say, mental illness. And at the same time, they voluntarily talk about that stuff. They want to go out there and raise awareness. So it's not like, in my opinion, I don't think they're being like used by the media. I think they have chosen to use the media to get their message out. And I know sometimes athletes are maybe used for their mental illness or their mental health situation. I don't think that was the case with them. I feel like they wanted to do that. They chose to.
I think that's why they spoke up.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it was important. And we thought it was important to start with those because that's, in my opinion, that's really where there was a turn. Because if you look at the timeline, DeMar DeRozan tweeted about mental health, about depression in February of 2018. Kevin Love then he even acknowledges, was motivated by DeMar DeRozan doing that. And Kevin Love spoke up about his, mental health and mental illness in March of 2018. So that's a month later. Then Michael Phelps, comes out and talks about his mental health and mental illness struggles in May of 2018. And then Robin Lehner is in September of 2018. So I'm not saying that they're all related, but I think there's clearly something happening around that time where there's started to be a domino effect in the athletic world with athletes talking about mental health, talking about mental illness, and wanting to use their platform to speak up and speak out and educate people about that stuff. So to me, I think that's a large reason why we chose those athletes in the beginning was because of their central role in really encouraging athletes everywhere to be honest and speak up about this stuff. Then we chose Serena. I mean, to me, I think Serena as an athlete is kind of on like the pantheon of greatest athletes ever, right? Ever. It's hard between sports and different things like that, but I think she's got to be at the top. So dominant athlete. And we thought it was important to talk about anger as an issue and dispel some myths, I think, in terms of, racial myths and gender-oriented myths. We wanted to get into that episode for that reason. So that was kind of a cool one to do. Brad Marchand, we mainly did because, he was a Boston athlete. and I thought it was kind of a cool way to relate a unique topic to other people listening in terms of reputation and not being pigeonholed into our roles when we're younger and families and things like that. Then we get into Josh Gordon and substance misuse, and we actually changed our title. We're growing as we do this, right? When we choose titles, we're trying to identify the topic or issue that the person is either kind of aligned with or they spoke up about. Sometimes that's because in a good way. Sometimes it's because it needs to be kind of questioned or challenged. Anger is a good example of that. That's why we put anger question mark for this Serena episode. But with Josh Gordon, substance misuse, we had labeled that substance abuse. And I guess, more recently that term substance abuse has been gotten away from in a good way. And people are preferring substance misuse instead, which I think is a good thing. So we're learning as we do this, right? I didn't even know that.
Me either.
So we switched the title on, podcast platforms, YouTube, things like that. That episode sort of relates to Robin Lehner, who we also talk about because of the connection between trauma and substance abuse. And so we tried to cover two angles. With Josh Gordon, it's much more about, the things he went through and the substance use specifically. And then with Robin Lehner, we more kind of focus on the trauma piece and PTSD. So we try to cover like the full kind of angle of that. Let's see. Then we get into for the Josh Gordon episode, we had our first athlete engagement, right? Chris Long commented on our IGTV post, which if you want to check out, you can. It's on my Instagram at Jotham Busfield. You can check out his comment. Let us know what you think about that. It was good to get one athlete to interact with our stuff,
absolutely.
Right? So then we get the Dak Prescott and recovery episode, which obviously is your, recovery mindset and injury recovery is one of your specialties when working with clients. So we knew that would be a great episode to do. You really crushed that in terms of going through your process with athletes. And I got a lot of good feedback from people about that as well. One thing that my brother actually brought up, he made this point about he asked if we're also going to feature Alex Smith in an episode because of there's a documentary out there about Alex Smith. Have you watched that?
I've only gone through about half of it, but it's pretty incredible.
It's nuts, right? So I had seen that before, and we were kind of tossing around why to do Dak as the athlete instead of doing Alex Smith. I think ultimately at the time we chose to do Dak because he was in the process of the recovery, and it was sort of a multifaceted recovery with mental health and and physical health, and he had been very outspoken about mental health and the importance of that. And we always try to focus on athletes that do that.
Yep.
So Trev, my brother made a good point about why he thinks we should still feature Alex Smith, and he wrote, he texted me. So the quiet man who goes about his business and doesn't show his emotions is often having trouble internally, and it can cause health issues by suppressing feelings. But what makes Alex Smith able to be successful doing so? So basically he's asking us to look into different avenues to success, because Alex Smith does very much seem like a person who, if you look at what he went through and then you look at how he presents, it's like, how is he so cool, calm, and collected, right? He's just this naturally resilient guy, seemingly on the outside, who is able to not be affected physically or mentally by the drastic physical recovery he had to go through. He almost lost his leg, could have died.
Yep.
And just seemed like he maintained composure the entire time, right? Wasn't phased at all. At least that's how it's seen from the outside looking in. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that question by my brother about featuring Alex Smith, or what allows someone like Alex Smith to be successful doing things maybe in a more stoic way.
Yeah, I think we've talked about different types of strength, and that there's the strength to be vulnerable, but then there's also the strength to be able to withstand and be resilient. And it's a fine line. I think both are highly valuable, but obviously Alex Smith seems to be more on the stoic side. I think when dealing with this type of issue, or dealing with someone who presents more stoic or more sort of internal, I always sort of look to who is surrounding this person, and I imagine, and I haven't seen the whole piece, but his support network is probably relatively strong. The people around him giving him support.
So he's not doing it alone.
Not doing it by himself. Yeah. Key point. Thank you. Yeah. So that's, again, he might be sort of able to hold and be stoic and go about his business, and he probably is hyper vigilant about what he wants to do and his goals, and sort of sticks with that as a way to kind of continue moving forward despite all the shit that he's had to go through physically, and having people around him that are going to help him on those bad days, because there's going to be bad days. That would be sort of my curiosity and my thinking about what allows him to be successful is the team that is surrounding him is probably really strong.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think it's another example of how support matters so much, and that even when a person is seemingly invincible, right, or able to push through adversity, and they're resilient, that a lot of times it's not just them. It's the people around them. It's their family. It's their parents. It's their siblings. Who knows, right? The people that are key in their life. So that's a great point. I think my three guesses that I had texted him back, that I thought I have three kind of potential things, or a combo of these things, that go into what explains someone like Alex Smith being able to kind of handle things the way he does. I think it's a combination of 2 and 3, but I'll get to the 3. So the first one is he's holding it in, right? So there's always a chance that he looks fine on the outside, but he's just really holding it in.
Struggling.
Yeah, really struggling on the inside. There's always a chance that that's happening with him, or any person that looks like they have their what together all the time. Especially with guys. That tends to be very common. So that's one. The second one is religion. So, I'm not going to get into my beliefs about religion because it's not relevant, but I think he's a religious person. And I think for some people who are religious, they're so committed to their faith that they kind of are able to deflect adversity as part of God's plan. And I think it speaks to some of the benefits that religion can have for people who have that intense faith. They're able to use it to be resilient and get through life. So I think that's for some people, that really helps. The third one is they're just lucky and naturally resilient. I think that some people are kind of, again, we talk about mental illness or physical illness, and how sometimes, people are born, predisposed to certain things going wrong, and other people get lucky. They hit the genetic jackpot, and they just aren't. That could be physically, or you think about athletes, obviously anyone who plays a sport professionally is sort of at the top echelon of lucking out when it comes to physical attributes and just the ability to be an athlete. Not all, but most are kind of gifted with that, and then hard work just elevates them to the next level. So I think I would guess for Alex Smith, it's the combination of 2 and 3. He doesn't strike me as someone that's holding it in, but people are really good at hiding it.
Really good at it.
So
yep.
I think that's how I would kind of cover that. So I thought that was a good point by Trev, and I thought it was important. We might cover Alex Smith at some point, but we'll see. We kind of want to cover any athlete that's shown to be able to go through adversity, but especially athletes that speak up about mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that brings up a good point too about like for people who are listening, we will respond to like feedback or things or ideas or things like that. Like we want to hear from you guys in terms of what you are curious about or what you want to learn more about to be able to bring stuff like this. So this type of stuff is great because then we can vent on it a little bit and sort of share our thoughts and things like that. So for people who are listening, please like keep the feedback coming in, post all that different stuff because it makes it really enjoyable for us to be engaging back with you guys and talking about some of the topics that you guys want to be talking about.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point about how people should best like engage with us. I mean, I'm kind of open. Like I'm on Instagram at Jotham Busfield. I'm on Twitter at Jotham LICSW. Twitter is an enigma to me. I'm still trying to figure that out, and it's extremely negative. So I try to.
I haven't gotten there yet.
Oh yeah, just stay away. just trust me. So I'm trying to be more active on those platforms, but I think it's a learning experience. It's a learning curve like anything else. But so I'd encourage people to like engage with us that way, just so we can try to get a back and forth going about some of these things. They're difficult topics, and we're not always going to agree on every aspect of it. But having a dialogue is the most important thing because to me. Even when, like, if we talk about something and we disagree about something, like we own a business together, so we're not always going to agree, it always feels like it elevates me and I get better at what I do by having, an opinion that's not always the same as mine from a person I trust. I think that's important to have that kind of dialogue. So, and I think it's the same with this stuff.
Yeah.
So then the last two of the top 10, we had Hayden Hurst and suicide prevention, which obviously is a really important issue. The numbers have not been going in a good direction. We thought it was really important to cover how to prevent some things like that from happening. And then Barstool Sports and Masculinity, we wanted to round out the top 10 with a kind of outside the box episode. And masculinity is a topic that we think relates to mental health and relates to a lot of mental fitness and things like that. So,
and we're going to have a longer conversation on that because
yes.
I feel like we were crunching a whole bunch of information in there and then we got going, so we definitely want to revisit some of that.
Absolutely So a couple of the takeaways I had for me that stood out, I guess this relates to the Josh Gordon episode, but I think it relates to a lot of stuff in general, and that's I would encourage people to like not underestimate your brain or body's ability to adapt to negative lifestyles. I think whether it's like alcohol, weed, negativity, bad sleep, poor diet, no exercise, mental health issues, toxic relationships, I think we have this ability as humans. It's like a gift and a curse. We have this ability to like adapt to really bad situations or really bad things that we're doing in our life and not see what it's doing. It just allows us to kind of get through. And I think you often don't see what's happening until it's too late, right? And an example of this is like I was listening to the Bill Simmons podcast the other day, and he had I think he's an NBA reporter. His name's Chris Haynes on, who was talking about his experience in the bubble. He was talking about how different teams reacted different ways to the bubble and how the Clippers were one team that was really struggling. And I think Paul George is someone that has come out and said he got depressed when he was in the bubble. I think he said that. Don't quote me. But that team seemed to not really do well with that isolated, contained environment. I think it was a struggle for people. And he was a reporter that was in the bubble because he was covering the NBA. And he said he didn't realize what it did to him until he got out, until he left. And then he could reflect back. And I think there's so many issues with mental health that are like that it's very hard to see when you're in it day to day. It's very hard to see what it's doing to you. An example of this is like, let's say I gained 20 pounds in 2 months, right? And you hadn't seen me in 2 months. And I show up and I'm 20 pounds heavier. You're going to notice that. Now, my wife, who sees me every day, is not going to notice that, really. Well, she might. I mean, she probably see it, but she wouldn't notice it as much because we see each other every day, right? You're not going to notice the problems that are slowly forming in your own life because you're your own person. You're around yourself all day long, right? Literally. Yep. So it's important with mental health that I think people have to recognize how deceiving some of these things are, and they form gradually. And it's really important to kind of effectively find ways to step back from the painting to get a clear view. Yeah. If you're always smushed up against the painting, I like to use that kind of metaphor. You're not going to see things clearly. You're not going to see the bigger picture. You got to find ways to step back. So that's something I wanted to add.
Yeah, I think I mean, that's one of the benefits of coming and talking to
Yeah.
a trained professional.
Totally.
Is they can like force you to like back up and look at the full painting, and like you've been here up against it for so long. Well, let's see the
Yes.
full picture from a non-judgmental, not in your world person, right?
Yeah.
I think that's part of why we do what we do and why it can be so effective. Because you, like you said, even maladaptive or behaviors that aren't working in your best interest are still going to sort of be comforting because
they're
you're
your norm.
used to their norm,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so even if they're not giving you what you need, and that's why sort of having someone to be like, hey, I'm noticing that this might not be in your best interest. Can you tell me a little bit more about why this is something that you continue to do? And have someone sort of just challenge your behaviors in a way from a non-judgmental standpoint, but be able to say like, I'm wondering or curious if this is still working in your best interest, to kind of force you to zoom out a little bit. And I think that's a huge benefit of coming in and talking to somebody like us.
Totally agree. And sometimes it's, primarily about just hearing yourself talk. I think, we've talked about this in other episodes, but it's very hard to make sense of all the confusion and things that are going on in your life, in your head, while it's in your head. Like you have to like either you write it down or talking about it is the best thing, because you hear yourself and you get someone else, especially someone who's trained, to reflect back and to be able to kind of make sense of it all. That is proactive. That helps you make sense of things so that problems do not form, so that instead of getting closer and closer to the painting, you are getting farther back. You always maintain that nice kind of view of the full picture.
Right.
Really important when it comes to mental fitness and ultimately mental health. So on that note, I wanted you to discuss a little bit, John, how listeners can find a therapist. Because let's say it's a very confusing landscape. You go online, you do some searching. Everyone's got a different slew of initials coming at them at the end of their name. What the hell do all those mean? That kind of thing. What would you say to anyone looking to find a therapist?
I think first and foremost, like you said, there's a whole bunch of different initials after everybody's name. So we're hopefully going to shine.
Everyone loves to feel important.
Light. Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So, and then there's like the psychologist, there's a psychiatrist, there's coaches, there's life coaches, there's a whole wide range of different people to go and back to get into. And I would say that the first priority would be to find someone that's the best fit. I maybe a little bit biased, but in terms of this work, I fall much more, not to say that life coaches can't be helpful for people, but working with a licensed professional is in my opinion, more beneficial. I'll say that.
Because the coaching industry is less regulated. I think they have like certification programs and stuff. And I think it's gotten better, but they don't have degrees necessarily, and they're not licensed by a board that oversees their ethics and things like that.
Right.
So it's a little bit
or
more
ongoing training or those types of things.
It's a bit more like the Wild West, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's variations of different licensures, and so in Massachusetts there's LMHC, which is licensed mental health counselor. There's clinician. There's LICSW, licensed independent
clinical social worker.
LMFT, which is a licensed mental family therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist. Psychologist is someone who really focuses on like testing. So you might hear terms like a neuropsych or a neurological psychological evaluation. So that's when you go in, you do sometimes multiple days of testing to figure out what a diagnostic piece might be. It's basically a snapshot of how your brain works. So processing speeds, working memory. There's a whole wide range of different things. A lot of feedback in terms of how your brain best learns. And then the psychiatrist is a medical doctor who works primarily with medication management. So oftentimes, if you're working with mental illness, medication might be a part of treatment, and working with a licensed clinician and a psychiatrist oftentimes happens. And so that's sort of the difference. And a life coach is much more about, in my experience, more about like mentality. It doesn't, you're getting no clinical treatment whatsoever. Right. This person's not certified to be able to do that or trained to do that.
You shouldn't be anyway.
I hope not. I think that's part of my fear that stuff is happening. So, but some people it works, and that's great. In terms of finding a professional, there's a bunch of different like referral sites. We prefer ZenCare as a place for someone to go and look for somebody. They have, you can go search for different specialities by location. There's like a video of the clinician that's on there you can kind of hear that person, which helps, which I think helps a little bit. Yeah. There's other places too, like Psychology Today is one of the more popular ones. Personally, I think it's really difficult for a person who's searching to just be scrolling through a bunch of different faces and
Yeah.
they all kind of start blending together.
It's tough,
So it's
yeah.
really hard. I think that the best place to be is to get a personal referral. So if you know someone,
word of mouth.
Oh,
Yeah,
word of mouth,
yeah.
I think is the best, because you get a better picture of the person you can be going in to work with.
Mhm.
I think that's definitely the biggest one. I think, and when you're trying to find somebody, it's okay if the first person you meet doesn't feel like a good match.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, and especially now, finding someone with availability is hard, and I think it's causing maybe some people to sort of like, oh yeah, I gotta meet with that person because I finally got an appointment.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay, giving people permission if you meet with someone and it doesn't feel like a good vibe, to just say, it doesn't feel like it's going to be a good fit, and find someone. That could take a couple people to get in front of, which I know as a person can be frustrating, but the work is far better when you're sitting in front of somebody that you're like, I can do this work with this person.
Yeah.
So, when you're reaching out for people, most clinicians, if they don't, they should be doing free consultations.
Most don't, which to me is
baffles
I
me.
know. I don't
It
know. We
baffles
do
me.
that, and we found that is so important for us and the clients. I think it's really good for the therapist to make sure that you feel like it's a good fit and you can help this person.
Right.
Because if you meet them for 20 minutes and you just, based on the issues that they might be dealing with and your experience as a clinician or whatever, you decide that, I don't think this is a great fit. I think I should find someone else. That's in the best interest of the client and you as a clinician.
Right.
So to me, there is a no-brainer to do that. We have always done that.
Mm-hmm.
I think clients have liked that because it gives them a 20-minute intro to us where we talk about our approach.
Mm-hmm.
You paint a picture, and then the client can be like, all right, I like what this dude has to say. This seems like a pretty good possibility. I'll give it a shot.
Yep.
Or they might be like, I don't think this is a good fit. I think I should go elsewhere. What do you recommend? And I'll always give them other names or that kind of thing if a person doesn't feel like it's a good fit.
Absolutely. And the other thing too, I guess it's maybe sounds a little bit hypocritical, but also too, I think that the person might, it's a hard process, especially if it's the first time you're going in to meet with a therapist and it's completely new. And sometimes you got to give it a couple of times to be able to meet with that person to sort of start to establish a rapport.
Mm-hmm.
Trust doesn't just happen because you've chosen to go in to work with somebody in therapy. Yeah. It takes it takes a while for that to sort of develop. And so if it really feels like it's not going to be a good fit, or the person doesn't specialize in what you're looking to do, then maybe it's not a good fit. Mm-hmm. But if it is a person that specializes in what you do, sometimes giving it a few sessions can be really helpful. And sort of, I've heard that before where people say, I stopped before really I needed to, or I in the beginning it was really uncomfortable, but then the more that we got to work, it was like, wow, this is really starting to click. So I'd encourage people when they're reaching out to people or reaching out to other places, ask for a consultation. If they do free consultations, they should. If they don't, it's in my opinion, I think it's a little bit of a red flag.
Kind of.
Not necessarily that the work can't be done or they're not good clinicians, but it just feels like a service that everybody in our field should be doing. Mm-hmm. And then, if it doesn't feel like a good fit, say that and say, this doesn't feel like it's going to be a great fit. Do you have anyone else that you think I could get in touch with based on, our conversation today? And then if it does feel like a good fit, but it's a little more uncomfortable or it's challenging for you, then give it a few sessions and see how it goes from there.
I agree. I think, you get an initial consultation just to make sure that there's some level of comfort there in terms of like you seeing keeping an open mind, seeing potential working with this person. In a consult, unless it's like clearly a bad fit, I think it's worth going forward. Mm-hmm. And then once you give it a shot, I really think you need 3-4 sessions to be able to gauge like, what is my fit with this person? Have we started to make progress? If not, why not? Right? That being honest about their own participation in that, because that's a two-way street. Sometimes, if a client comes in and 4 sessions in, they're not willing to get into things, that can be a barrier. So I think people have to give it at least 4 sessions and be honest with themselves about, am I keeping an open mind? Am I giving this a chance to then evaluate? And after 4, if they've been open-minded and they've really given it a shot and they're not feeling a connection, then it's time to maybe switch to find another alternative.
Yep, exactly.
Coaches, I think the one thing I would say is that coaches, I don't want to sound like we're being negative towards coaches. I think, coaching is great and they help a ton of people. Yep. I think it's just a lot of them are not licensed clinicians, so it's ideal to find someone who does both. I mean, that way you get both sides.
Right.
And then there's times when you don't need a licensed clinician, and coaches are very good at focusing on specific things. And that's what I would say. If you're working with a coach, make sure you're going to them for like one thing that they specialize in. Career coaching, executive coaching, that kind of stuff. They're going to focus on that one area of life, and they're going to be an expert in that as a
highly
coach.
Specialized.
Yeah, highly specialized, aware of the changes in that landscape or that market, and they'll be able to kind of get you results quickly. Ideally, that's the goal, right? Executive coaches, career coaches, they're really good at that. Look for coaches that do, they work on specific niches or like focus on a specific issue.
Yeah, and understand their limitations.
Yeah.
Right? Like they understand like this isn't a realm that I can help with. Here's some options of places that you could go to do some of that stuff, which is what clinicians do. If we're working with someone that doesn't feel like a good fit, that's what we do, right? This isn't the realm of my scope. I'm going to refer you out to someone that does this more specialized work.
Absolutely. So that's we just wanted to give listeners a little bit of a heads up of how to navigate that, because it is a daunting kind of process, and especially when someone's struggling already and now they have to like do this huge online search for clinicians and try to find the right one. I mean, it's stressful, and there are already a lot of people are already hurting, so it's like trying to get through that is difficult. I would just encourage people to keep going and try to find that person that you connect with enough to start opening up, because it is worth it and it can help.
Yep.
So I think that's it for this episode. Again, we're just trying to recap episodes 1 through 10 of the Grim Drive podcast so far, and give you some of our takeaways and some of the things that we think are important to discuss to that next level, like we did today. We'll be back next time. For the next episode, we're going to actually preview episodes 11 through 20 and maybe discuss some possible episodes after episode 20, just to get into what's upcoming, what you have to look forward to. And we'll go from there. So thank you for joining us today for the Grim Drive podcast. We will talk to you next time.
Thanks, everyone.